Hey, what's up everybody? This is your boy Adam here, and I'm going to be showing you how easy it is to put together your own computer from scratch. And I bought all custom components because I would rather know what goes inside of my computer. And I spent maybe, I think it was $1,100 on everything. And this is the case I got. So up in this top box here, there's the PSU, the motherboard, the CPU, the water cooling unit, the everything that goes inside the case. The case I got is the Cooler Master HAF 932 high airflow full tower chassis, and that's what it looks like. So I'm gonna unbox everything right now, get it up over here on the desk, and then we'll take a look at the components that we have going into it, and then I'll show you how simple it is to put it together, and the documentation that they give you with all of these components should help you on your way. Let's unbox everything and rock and roll. Okay, so now I have everything unboxed, and here you can see on my desk I've got the tower laying on its side so I can easily get inside and put all the pieces in. I've got it sitting on some styrofoam there so I don't scratch my desk or ruin the side of the chassis. You can see this chassis is really nice. It's a really nice setup. Everything is pop in, pop out. Everything is nice and meshed out so it's breathable. So if you're not going to use any of these slots, it still has that nice mesh there so everything can breathe real good. It's got extra fan space on the bottom if I need it. Giant fan on the top. And on the side of the door that you can't see, that would be right here, there's another same size fan as this one on the door. So here's the door. You can see it's got that nice security style type window where you can see through, and then there's the huge fan. So that's the door. Now let's take a look at the things that are going to go inside of it. And usually they'll give you all kind of little components and things that you'll need for the case, in the case when you get it. Okay, so first we have the motherboard, the Asus Hybrid Extreme Design. It's the M4A89 GTD Pro. So that's the motherboard. For the CPU, I opted to go for, and you'll notice that all of my components here are not high-end. They're not top of the line. I always go maybe one or two steps down from top of the line to save money, but you still have high-end equipment that will last a good long time through all your computing needs. Okay, so the processor is the AMD Phenom 2. It's the AMD Phenom 2 Black Edition, and it's the X4 965. And I chose AMD over Intel just to save some money, but I can overclock this bad boy if I need. And what's cool about this motherboard is that this motherboard has special features on it. Basically it has a little switch that you can just switch over and it'll overclock for you automatically. So that's why I got that motherboard, is because it's nice and feature rich. So that's the processor and the motherboard. The RAM, or the memory modules I got, are the 4 gigabytes of DDR3 from Corsair. And I've only got 4 gigabytes because I want to try this out. It's got really nice heatsink on it. And you got to make sure you have enough room in your tower. I got a nice big tower, so I won't have any space issues. But if this memory works out real nice, I'm going to double up and I'll have 8 gigabytes. But I want to see how that memory runs first before I go ahead and invest in another pack. Then we have the power supply unit. This is Diablotech's 950 watt ATX power supply, and this one was really highly rated at TigerDirect.com. Everybody gave it rave reviews, and Diablotech is not a company I've ever went with before for any of my components, but since the reviews were so nice and it was so affordable, I figured I would get it. And I wanted something near 1,000 watts. 950 is good for me. That's all I need. I don't need too much. Now we got some niceness here. Now this is not top of the line either, but it's high enough for all of my 3D, and this thing will handle it just fine. This is the Radeon HD 5770. And it's got 1 gigabyte GDDR5 memory, HDMI output, PCI Express 2.1. So, and I've always been with Radeon all through my computer builds. Every computer I've ever built, I use Radeon graphics cards. Okay, so that's the power supply and the graphics card. Then here we have, for the CPU, the H50 water cooling unit for the CPU cooler. And what it has is a radiator and the module that goes onto the CPU itself. And so this is my first experience with water cooling for CPU. And that is the Corsair H50. Then we have Microsoft Windows 7. I figured I'd go with Windows 7 because I've always used Windows for my operating systems. Then we have a SATA hard drive that is a 1.5 terabytes. Nothing real special there, but it has lots of space on it for everything I'll need. Plus I already have tons of external drives for storing files and things like that. So this 1.5 terabyte hard drive will just be for installing my programs and holding the programs that I have installed and anything that will be on my C drive. For holding videos and audio files and things of that nature, I just use external drives. So that is everything. Oh wait, no, last thing is this. Anti-static strip. The anti-static wrist strap bracelet. And I get this, and I know it's kind of dorky to use this, but I have a lot of carpet in my home. And every time I walk around, I build up static charge through my feet. And I can tell because anytime I touch anything metal in my house, it zaps me. So I'm going to work with the anti-static wrist strap when building everything. Alright, so now I'm going to take everything out of these boxes and we're going to start piecing this thing together like Lego, man. Okay, so in this particular case, I removed the stock fan that came in this section here, and I'm going to be putting our water cooling system fan there, and the radiator will be sitting on top of it. And this particular case has a little guide that tells us if we're using an ATX or a micro ATX or eATX. It shows us where to mount our little risers that'll hold the motherboard up. So I'm going to go ahead and put my risers in place, and then I'm going to install my motherboard. Okay, now your motherboard will come with something like this for all of the components that you can connect to. So you install that little plate. Make sure you put it in the right direction. And it just pops into place like that. Okay, now, for my particular motherboard, I have to remove, if I want to put my water cooling unit in for the CPU, I have to remove the heatsink fan bracket and the back plate off of the motherboard. So I'm going to do that now, and I'm going to put the water cooling bracket and back plate on. Okay, so here's the back plate that I removed that came on the motherboard. Get rid of that. And here is, see that black bracket? That's the one that came with the H50. So I just put that one in place. Now let's go ahead and put this thing on. Just set it right into place. And now we'll screw in the 9 screws that go in. Push it up against the edge, nice and snug. Let's get screw number 1 in place, and the rest will follow suit. Make sure you don't screw those in too hard. Okay, now with the motherboard in place, we're all ready to unbox and get our central processing unit into the socket. Now you can't go wrong with this because there's a little arrow on the socket and there's also a little arrow on the processor. So you can see there's a little gold arrow at the very top of your processor if you have this type, and there's a little arrow here so it all lines up. And there's also little positioning segments inside of the socket that correspond with those little empty spaces there in the unit. So let's go ahead and grab that out. You pull the lever up, move it to the side, pull it up, make sure it's at a 90-degree angle there. Let's make sure our arrows line up, and into place it goes. There it is. Now you just go ahead and lock that back down. And your processor is in place. Okay, now we're ready to install the H50 bracket and get the water cooling system on. And this is the bracket I removed, the default bracket that came with the motherboard that I removed. And it has a heatsink, which is pretty nice looking actually. But I'm not going to be using this. I'm going to be using the H50. But if you're using something like this, you'll notice that there's thermal paste already pre-applied. So you wouldn't need any thermal gel for this type. And for my H50 I don't need any thermal gel as well because it's pre-applied also. So all I have to do is get the bracket for the H50 on, which is this guy right here. This is for the AMDs. All I got to do is set that into place and we're ready to put on the H50 water cooling unit. Now before I attach the unit to the processor, I have to put this fan, where I removed the stock fan that came on the case. I'm going to put this fan right here. And then here we have the radiator. This radiator goes on top of the fan. And then there's the unit that sits on top of the processor. So this fan is going to go here. The radiator is going to be attached to it. And then the unit gets attached to the processor. It has that thermal layer all ready to go, so you don't need paste. Okay, so now we have our pump that's ready for the cooling system. The radiator and fan is all in place. So now we're going to add the DDR3 RAM into the DIMM slots here. And I'm going to use the 2 blue slots. I'm going to leave the 2 black ones blank for when I get another package of this, so I can beef up to 8 gigabytes. Now most motherboards recommend that you put, if you have 2 cards or if you have 2 sticks, to put your sticks in slot 1 and 3. If you have 4 sticks, then they just fill up all 4 slots. And I recommend DDR3 because it's less of a power consumption and it gives you better performance. And the way these are notched, you can't mess up the way you put it in, because these notches here correspond to those notches there. Okay, now we're going to install the Radeon HD 5750, which is a beautiful card. This is one of my favorite components of the whole system. And for this particular motherboard, we have a couple of PCIe slots. This one on top that's white or gray, and then this blue one. My Radeon's going to go in this blue slot, and then the motherboard came bundled with a VGA switch card, which is going to go into the gray slot. So I'm going to go ahead and put those in, and then we're about ready to get the power supply unit in to start connecting all of the case and chassis wires to the motherboard. Man, this thing is really pretty. This is a beautiful card. Look at that. When you're handling these cards, you want to make sure that you don't get your fingers all over that stuff on the bottom there. So you hold it by the edges as best you can. This thing is nice. It's not top of the line Radeon, but it's pretty. It's a lot nicer than what I was using. Now, what we're going to do is make sure we remove two of these slots here that are going to correspond to where the card is going to be plugged into that dark blue PCI Express slot. So I'm going to pop these out, then I'm just going to turn it the way it needs to be turned, pop it right in, and then we'll get the power supply unit set in. Okay, so as you can see, we've got the Radeon in place, and that's pretty much everything that's going to go into the motherboard for right now. And soon I'm going to take all of these wires here that are sitting on the side here, and that's going to connect everything that powers the chassis to the motherboard. Now, before I do that, I'm going to add this, see if you can see that, the Diablotech 950 watt power supply. It's not the biggest power supply or the most wattage, but this one comes highly recommended, and it has great ratings. And I don't think I'll need any more than 950 watts. And this case happens to come equipped with top or bottom mount for the power supply. So I'm going to mount the power supply on the very bottom, right under the Radeon video card there. Now, as you can see, this power supply is not modular. All the cords come attached to it. But this case is really nice in that you can hide all of your wires in the sides. So it's a really good case for wire management. And there's also these little Velcro ties that come with it. It came with the Diablotech that will help me with cord management and hiding my wires and such. But most of the wires can go, if they're not going to be used, can go hidden throughout the chassis, the back of the chassis. And I wish everything was blue, but we got a little bit of red. It's like a rainbow colored inside of my machine now. So we got a little bit of red here, a little bit of blue. Now we got some yellow. That fan's yellow. And that's what it looks like. But it has all the power cables that you would need for a really high-end rig. So let's set this sucker into place. Okay, if you guys are curious, I've been ground on my wrist to the chassis of the machine, the metal part of the inside of the computer, of the case. So now what we're going to do is add the last important part, which is the 1.5 terabyte SATA hard drive. And this is where we'll load our operating system and store our files. Now in this case we have a really nice feature, which is screwless assembly for your hard drives and also your bays. Any of your bays, they just pop in, pop out. So you want to take this right out. We'll just pop it in. You want to make sure you don't touch the green stuff or the gold stuff on the back of the hard drive, or the universe will cease to exist. So now we're just going to slide this into place. Get it the right direction. Now those pop into that side, and then you can just kind of bend these out of the way and slide it on. There we go. Look how easy that is. No screwing around. So once that slides down into place, you just lock it back in, and then you'll have access to the power supply for that hard drive and the cable that communicates the hard drive to the motherboard on the other side. So it can be accessed through the other door very easily. Alright, I think that is pretty much everything that we need. Now the last thing I'm going to do is get all of these cables here that are part of the chassis, like for instance the power button, the USB, fans, and all kind of other stuff that might be connected, like this fan in the front here. This fan on the side has its own little wire here, but all these various wires are for the case. All the various buttons, some an interface for a lot of different things. So what I'm going to do is take my motherboard manual, and I'm going to make sure that I hook all of these things to the correct place on the motherboard. Now once that's done, we can then go ahead and see if it powers up and then load the operating system on it. Okay, now I'm going to add this DVD drive. That way we can load programs in the operating system onto the machine. And I'm just going to pop it into place, which on different cases it's a little bit different procedure. This case is really nice. It lets you just pop in and pop out with those little plastic buttons there. So it's a screwless assembly for that as well. So let's go ahead and get that in. Okay, here it is with everything set up, plugged in. Now all that needs to happen is we put the power cable into the power supply unit, plug it in, and see if it fires up. I'm going to run these cables a little more cleanly and hide things better when I realize that everything's working, because if something happens to not be working when I plug it in, we'll have to take things out and test and diagnose. So once everything is working, I see it powers up fine, we'll hide these cables a little bit better. But as it is, you can see that it's decent cable management. Most of the cables are hidden behind the back of it, or the rear door. So let's turn it on and see what happens. Okay, so I've closed up the doors, I booted it up just fine, so I loaded Windows 7 onto it, and we're running dual display from our Radeon HD 5770, which we could also add another Radeon card and run Crossfire. But you want to make sure you have a power supply unit that's maybe 1000 watts and better if you're going to run two video cards like that. And we have an Asus motherboard and the AMD processor, and the Asus motherboard that we have in here gives us an easy ability to overclock the graphics and the processor. So even though I didn't buy a really high-end AMD processor or Intel processor, I can overclock this one very easily with the flick of my wrist. Just switch a little switch in there and it'll overclock that processor for me. And we have liquid cooling on the processor, so it'll stay nice and cool no matter what we do. So you can see it's not very hard to build your own custom rig with all your own custom components, and it's actually kind of fun. If you're anybody that likes putting things together or even taking things apart, you'll have a great time building your own computer.